Deep beneath the modern streets of Jerusalem, beneath the asphalt, centuries of rubble, and the foundations of empires that have risen and burned, lies an absence that defies all logic. King Solomon is a figure of staggering historical magnitude. He was the architect of the First Temple, a monarch whose wealth in gold, ivory, and cedar supposedly poured into the Levant like stones. Yet, while we have the monumental tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, the sprawling mausoleums of Roman emperors, and the jade-suited burials of Chinese warlords, the final resting place of ancient Israel's most legendary king is a total, haunting void. According to ancient texts, he was buried with his ancestors in a city that still exists today. But for over 2,000 years, no one has been able to find him. Yet how does a king who commanded the known world's attention simply vanish into the bedrock? The search for Solomon's tomb is not merely a quest for lost gold or mythical artifacts. It is a descent into a fractured subterranean labyrinth where history has been deliberately erased, rewritten, and buried under thousands of tons of shattered limestone. To understand the gravity of this vanishing act, we have to strip away the mythological aura of Solomon and look at the gritty, physical reality of 10th century BCE Jerusalem. The capital of the United Monarchy was not the sprawling metropolis of the later Roman era. It was a fiercely fortified, incredibly compact citadel clinging to a steep, narrow ridge known as the City of David, bounded by the deep Kidron Valley to the east and the Tyropoeon Valley to the west. This wedge of limestone was practically a fortress carved by nature. This is the exact geographical coordinate where the Hebrew Bible states, with blunt simplicity, that Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the City of David. It is a precise historical claim. It anchors the burial not in a distant desert location, but right in the beating heart of the royal capital. In the ancient Near East, kings were not laid to rest in quiet, isolated cemeteries. Their physical remains were kept close to the palace complex to project eternal authority. The bones of the ancestors were the literal foundation of the throne. The implications of this are staggering. If Solomon was indeed buried within the original boundaries of the City of David, his tomb would be an underground complex of unparalleled significance. Consider the material reality of his reign. Even accounting for the exaggerations of ancient scribes, the trade networks controlled by Jerusalem brought in exotic goods from across the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. A royal burial from this era, left untouched, would contain more than dust. Yet it would hold the physical evidence of a golden age: weapons forged of high-grade bronze, vessels of imported alabaster, ornaments of hammered gold, and vital inscriptions. In an era where epigraphic evidence from the Kingdom of Judah is painfully rare, a sealed royal tomb would act as an uncorrupted time capsule resolving centuries of academic debate about the true scale of the Davidic dynasty. It would be an archaeological earthquake, dwarfing the discovery of Tutankhamun's resting place. The Egyptian pharaoh was a minor king who died young. Solomon was the apex of an entire civilizational epoch. But what exactly are investigators looking for in the dark? The popular imagination often envisions a cavernous hall filled with gleaming treasure, similar to the Valley of the Kings. However, the geological and cultural reality of Iron Age Judah was vastly different. The Israelites did not build towering pyramids or sweeping mortuary temples above ground. They buried their dead in the earth, cutting into the living rock. The wealthy and the royal utilized bench tombs, which were chambers meticulously carved into the hard limestone bedrock of the Judean hills. A typical elite burial cave consisted of a narrow, low entrance, opening into a central square room. Along the walls, stone benches were carved out of the rock. The deceased would be laid upon these benches, wrapped in shrouds, surrounded by oil lamps, offering jugs, and personal items meant for the shadowy underworld known as Sheol. When a new family member died decades later, the dry bones of the previous occupant were carefully gathered and placed into a repository pit, literally fulfilling the ancient idiom of being gathered to their ancestors. The kings of the Davidic line, however, would have required something vastly more monumental. Now, the topography of the city of David suggests that the royal necropolis was a complex of large, interconnected subterranean chambers, cut exceptionally deep into the hillside to protect against grave robbers. The wealth of Solomon was legendary even in antiquity, making his tomb a high-value target from the moment the heavy stone was rolled into place. The ancient architects knew this perfectly well. The engineers who carved the royal tombs would have employed every architectural countermeasure available in the Iron Age. False walls, blind shafts, dead-end corridors, concealed entrances, and thousands of tons of packed backfill. The bedrock of Jerusalem is soft enough to carve with iron chisels, but structurally stable enough to hold massive subterranean voids without collapsing. The entire ridge is a honeycomb of natural karst caves, ancient water systems, and forgotten cellars. Finding a sealed tomb in this three-dimensional underground maze requires more than just blind digging. It requires reading the scars in the stone. The greatest obstacle to finding Solomon's tomb is not the ingenuity of ancient engineers, but the apocalyptic violence Jerusalem has endured over millennia. The city has been besieged, captured, sacked, and rebuilt dozens of times. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian army breached the walls, burned the Temple of Solomon to the ground, and systematically dismantled the city's defenses. It is highly probable that the royal tombs were targeted during this catastrophic sack, as conquering armies deliberately desecrated the graves of defeated kings to break the spirit of the conquered. But the Babylonians were just the beginning. The most devastating blow to the physical record of ancient Jerusalem came centuries later, in 70 CE, when the Roman legions crushed the Great Jewish Revolt. The Romans did not merely conquer the city, they erased its surface. The Temple Mount was scoured, walls were thrown down, and the entire landscape was fundamentally altered. Millions of tons of shattered stone and debris were pushed into the valleys, burying the original ground level of the city of David under 50 feet of rubble. The original topography was smothered, locking the ancient bedrock in absolute darkness. For nearly 2 millennia, the true location of the city of David, and therefore the royal tombs, was lost to human memory. Pilgrims and early explorers mistakenly identified the much larger western hill of Jerusalem as the original city, leading to centuries of misplaced reverence. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that the birth of modern archaeology shifted the focus back to the narrow, eastern ridge overlooking the Kidron Valley. Here, the search for Solomon transitioned from theology to geology. In the winter of 1913, a French archaeologist named Raymond Weil arrived in Jerusalem with an audacious mission: to strip away the Roman and Byzantine debris on the southern tip of the city of David and find the lost necropolis of the Davidic kings. Financed by Baron Edmund de Rothschild, Weil's excavation was one of the most physically grueling projects in the city's history. His laborers spent months hacking through compacted layers of history, hauling away thousands of baskets of soil, fragmented pottery, and fractured limestone, slowly descending through the ages. As Weil's team dug deeper, moving past the remnants of Roman villas and Byzantine homes, they finally struck the naked, ancient bedrock. What they found there sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Carved directly into the limestone spine of the ridge were 2 massive, artificial tunnels. They were not cisterns or water channels. They were distinctively architectural, featuring carefully leveled floors, vertical walls, and grooved slots near their entrances designed to hold massive stone ceiling slabs. And the larger of the 2, dubbed Tomb 1, was a cavernous gallery over 50 feet long, plunging deep into the hillside. The scale was breathtaking, pointing to a patron of immense wealth. Yet, the moment of triumph was clouded by a devastating realization. The tunnels were immaculately empty. There were no bones, no gold, no inscriptions. The soft limestone had been brutally hacked away by later Roman quarrying, destroying the original context. Weil stood in a monumental void. Were these really the tombs of the kings, quarried into oblivion? Or were they merely unfinished cellars, leaving the true necropolis still hidden? The answer lies in a strange, overlooked detail deep inside the rear wall of the main tunnel, an anomaly suggesting the complex didn't end there, but was merely an antechamber to something plunging far deeper into the darkness of the mountain. The anomaly at the back of Tomb 1 is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the tool marks along the limestone wall. To the untrained eye, it is merely a shadow in the rock. But to those who understand the psychology of ancient Levantine architects, it suggests a deliberate structural deception. In the high-stakes arms race between royal engineers and professional tomb robbers, a massive, easily accessible cavern was rarely the final destination. It was often a decoy. The true burial chamber, holding the king and his unimaginable wealth, would be concealed behind false walls, beneath heavy paving stones, or at the bottom of a secondary shaft filled with compacted earth. If Solomon's engineers followed the elite practices of the wider ancient Near East, the primary tunnel was designed to be found, breached, and looted, leaving the hidden sanctum untouched by those who broke through the outer seals. To carve such a complex required a staggering mobilization of human labor, operating in conditions of near absolute darkness. We must imagine the physical reality of the masons tasked with cutting Solomon's resting place. They did not have the benefit of explosives or heavy machinery. They worked entirely by hand, relying on heavy iron chisels and wooden or bronze mallets. Striking the hard Jerusalem limestone creates a sharp, deafening ring that would have echoed relentlessly through the cramped subterranean corridors. With every strike, the rock fractured into sharp splinters and a fine, suffocating white dust. This dust coated the sweating skin of the laborers, filled their lungs, and settled over every surface of the expanding cavern. The air inside the tunnels would have been incredibly thick. Now, the only source of light came from small, pinch-lipped clay lamps filled with cheap olive oil. These lamps produced a dim, flickering orange glow that barely pierced the darkness, casting long, monstrous shadows against the rough-hewn walls. More dangerously, the open flames consumed the limited oxygen in the tight space, replacing it with noxious black smoke and carbon dioxide. Laborers would have worked in strict relays, retreating to the surface when the air grew too foul to breathe, while lines of workers carried out the shattered stone in woven reed baskets. The sheer volume of material removed from the bedrock to create these voids represents thousands of hours of brutal, back-breaking exertion. It was an engineering project of fanatic devotion, driven by the absolute authority of the crown. Once the stone was cleared, the space had to be prepared for eternity. The walls would be smoothed, and in the case of a king as wealthy as Solomon, possibly lined with imported cedar wood to mimic the grandeur of his palace above. The logistics of the royal burial itself were a complex, highly choreographed affair. When the king finally passed, his body was not swiftly hidden away. It was prepared, anointed with staggering quantities of myrrh, aloe, and expensive oils, masking the scent of death with the heavy, sweet perfume of the ancient spice trade. The king would be laid upon a carved stone bier, wrapped in fine linen, and surrounded by the physical objects required to maintain his status in the underworld. The lived experience of these burial rituals was intensely sensory. The descent into the necropolis was a descent into the realm of the ancestors. The air would be thick with the smoke of burning incense, the chanting of priests, and the wailing of professional mourners echoing off the narrow walls of the city of David. Once the body was secured, the engineers executed their final task. They rolled a massive, disc-shaped stone weighing several tons across the entrance of the tomb. This stone was often set into a slanted groove, allowing it to easily roll into place, but making it nearly impossible to push back up the incline without specialized leverage. To seal the perimeter, the remaining gaps were packed with smaller stones and plastered shut, hardening into a solid barrier. But the physical sealing of the tomb was only the beginning of its lifespan. In the ancient world, a royal necropolis was an active, breathing institution. The dead required sustenance. Families, and in the case of a king, a dedicated class of priests, would return regularly to the entrance of the complex to pour libations of wine and oil and to offer sacrifices. The area outside the tomb would be stained with the ash of offerings and the blood of slaughtered animals. The ancestors were believed to hold sway over the living, their favor essential for the continued prosperity of the dynasty. Solomon's tomb would have been the ultimate pilgrimage site within the capital, a massive monument to the foundation of the royal line. This makes the utter disappearance of the site even more profoundly disturbing to modern scholars. If Weil's tunnels are indeed the royal tombs, their current state is a testament to an unprecedented scale of desecration. The Romans did not just loot the gold. They used the city of David as a quarry to build their new colony of Aelia Capitolina. They hacked away the roofs of the ancient chambers, turning sacred crypts into open-air pits for extracting building blocks. Any inscriptions, any carved lintels, any physical proof of Davidic ownership would have been obliterated by the swing of Roman pickaxes. Thus, the sheer brutality of this erasure has led a growing faction of archaeologists to reject Weil's discovery entirely. They argue the tunnels are too crude, too devoid of the typical architectural hallmarks of First Temple period burials, to belong to a king like Solomon. If Weil's massive cavities are not the tombs of the Davidic kings, the historical mystery deepens exponentially. It means the entire necropolis, a subterranean complex massive enough to hold generations of royalty, is still hiding intact beneath the modern neighborhoods of Silwan. The limestone ridge of the city of David is incredibly narrow, leaving only a few acres of bedrock where such a massive complex could logically be concealed. Yet, despite ground-penetrating radar, seismic testing, and decades of meticulous, inch-by-inch excavation by international teams, the bedrock has stubbornly refused to yield the kings. Every newly discovered water channel, every collapsed Canaanite wall, and every Roman drainage pipe is mapped, but the royal cemetery remains a phantom. This enduring absence has forced researchers to reconsider the strict interpretation of the biblical text. The ancient phrase, "buried in the city of David," might not have been a precise cartographic coordinate, but a broader geographical designation. This subtle linguistic shift opens up a terrifying and highly controversial possibility. The city of David was the original southern wedge of the settlement. Immediately to its north stood the Ophel, a fortified acropolis, and beyond that the towering platform of the Temple Mount itself, the very structure Solomon built. In the ancient Near East, kings were frequently buried directly beneath their palaces or adjacent to the temples of their patron deities. The kings of Ugarit and the later kings of Assyria constructed their tombs directly under the floors of their royal residences. Could Solomon have done the same? The theological implications of this theory are explosive. Later biblical texts and strict purity laws dictated that corpses were a source of severe ritual defilement. The presence of dead bodies, even the sealed bones of the greatest king, anywhere near the holy sanctuary of the temple, would have been considered an absolute abomination by later generations of priests. It represents a massive contradiction in the historical record. If the kings were not buried in the lower city, the only remaining option violates one of the strictest religious laws of the ancient world. It forces archaeologists to look toward a place so heavily contested, so layered with volatile history, that the very act of searching there is virtually impossible. The prophet Ezekiel, writing during the bitter, disorienting exile in Babylon, recorded a furious divine vision that inadvertently provides the greatest archaeological clue to this architectural heresy. In his text, God explicitly condemns the kings of Judah for defiling the holy sanctuary with the corpses of their kings. Ezekiel specifically complains that there was only a single, physical wall separating the sacred precinct of the living God from the rotting remnants of the royal dead. This is a breathtaking admission hidden in plain sight. It confirms, from a hostile contemporary source, that the royal necropolis was not safely distanced in the southern valleys, as later traditions insisted. It was pressing dangerously, suffocatingly close to the Temple Mount itself. For centuries, the early Davidic kings had operated under an older, yet more Canaanite and ancient Near Eastern paradigm. In that older world, the dead ruler remained a powerful, almost divine presence within the palace complex, their physical proximity radiating eternal authority. But as Israelite religion strictly centralized and its purity laws became rigidly, fiercely codified, the physical reality of Solomon's tomb morphed from a monument of glory into a theological nightmare. The decomposing bodies of the ancestors, no matter how legendary their earthly exploits, were now viewed as the ultimate source of severe ritual contamination. The very bones that legitimized the sitting monarch were slowly polluting the dwelling place of the divine. The priests of the later First Temple period would have been forced to walk a terrifying tightrope, conducting the highest holy rites just meters away from an underground complex radiating spiritual impurity. This irreconcilable tension points toward a radical, covert solution, one that would perfectly explain the empty, mutilated voids discovered by Raymond Weil on the southern ridge. If the later, hyper-pious kingsmen like Hezekiah or Josiah, who aggressively purged the kingdom of older, unorthodox practices, deemed the proximity of the royal dead to be an intolerable abomination, they would have been forced to do the unthinkable. They would have to exhume the greatest patriarchs of their own bloodline. This could never have been a public ceremony. Ripping the legendary King Solomon from his eternal rest would have sparked a violent revolt among a populace that deeply venerated the royal ancestors. It would have been a profoundly secretive, midnight operation. Imagine the suffocating tension of that endeavor. Teams of loyal, so ritually purified priests, bound by oaths of absolute silence, descending into the ancestral vaults under the flickering, smoke-heavy light of pitch torches. They would have to break the ancient, hardened clay seals, navigate the blind corridors, and confront the undisturbed dead. The air, trapped in the limestone for centuries, would be heavy with dust and the faint, sickly sweet lingering scent of ancient embalming resins. They were not hauling out chests of gleaming gold, weapons, or imported cedar. Their primary objective was the brittle, dry bones of Solomon, David, and their immediate successors. These sacred remains would be hastily gathered into limestone ossuaries or simple linen sacks and spirited away from the temple precinct into the deep, shadowy ravines of the Kidron Valley. Perhaps they were hidden in a completely unmarked, natural karst cave far beyond the city walls, an anonymous pit chosen specifically because it could never be found or worshipped. In this historical scenario, the Babylonian armies and the Roman legions never looted Solomon's tomb because, by the time their battering rams breached the city walls, the king was already gone. He had been erased by his own descendants, willingly sacrificed to save the sanctity of his temple. Yet, if this midnight exhumation never happened and Solomon's original tomb remains intact beneath the Temple Mount, or if it lies crushed and sealed beneath the massive Herodian expansion of the sacred platform, it is locked in an archaeological safe that can never, under any circumstances, be opened. The 35-acre esplanade, known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif, is the most volatile geopolitical tripwire on the planet. Its subterranean depths are entirely, unequivocally, off-limits to modern excavation. The religious and political stakes are simply too high. Sinking a single spade into that earth, or sending a remote probe into its deep subterranean cisterns, could ignite a global conflict. Ground-penetrating radar and seismic surveys conducted from the perimeter occasionally hint at massive, unnatural voids deep beneath the ancient paving stones, cavernous hollows that defy natural geology and suggest monumental human engineering. But they remain untouchable, silent shadows on a digital screen. No one can drill, no one can dig, and no one can physically verify their contents. The engineers who designed the sacred complex, whether in the first or second temple period, inadvertently built the perfect, unassailable fortress for the dead. The greatest king of antiquity is protected not by thousands of tons of compacted rubble, nor by the cunning traps of ancient tomb builders, but by the immovable, explosive force of modern faith. The 2,000-year mystery of Solomon's tomb ultimately transcends the physical search for gold, cedar, or bone. It represents the ultimate paradox of historical memory. Solomon was a king whose entire reign was defined by staggering physical accumulation. He imported silver until it was said to be as common as stones in the streets of Jerusalem. He brought in apes, peacocks, ivory, and massive timber fleets from Lebanon to construct a tangible, unshakable reality of power. He was the architect of permanence, building a structure meant to bind the creator of the universe to a specific coordinate on Earth. Yet, the Earth has swallowed him entirely. The immense gravity of his legacy, the proverbs, the wisdom, the sheer conceptual weight of his temple survived the millennia, but the physical man himself was perfectly erased. We are left with a haunting historical void. Beneath the bustling, sun-drenched streets of modern Jerusalem, beneath the crowded vendor stalls, the honking traffic, and the ancient pilgrim routes, lies a dark, silent, three-dimensional maze of limestone bedrock. Millions of people walk directly over this deeply buried invisible world every single year, their footsteps echoing faintly through the karst caves and shattered Roman quarries below. Somewhere in that absolute darkness, whether pulverized by Roman pickaxes, secretly relocated by desperate priests, or still lying sealed behind an undiscovered wall of rock, the great king waits. The failure to find Solomon is not a defeat of modern archaeology. It is the final, profound testament to the violent, uncompromising history of Jerusalem, a city that constantly consumes its past to build its future, keeping its greatest secrets buried forever in the stone.